I was born in South Pasadena in Southern California, which is right here. It's just to the east of Los Angeles, so I had a lot to do when I was little. Right over here in Southern Pasadena. Sometimes it feels like the only good memories that I have from my childhood are in this home. And we only lived there for a few years. But we lived across the street from my mom's best friend. And the two kids that lived down the street from me were my best friends too. It kind of feels like it was at a point in my life where everything was perfect. We had a pool and a really big front yard with a really big willow tree that had a swing on it. And the house even had a white picket fence out front where my mom would grow roses, and she would complain when the neighbors would cut some of the flowers off. And I remember one day I looked outside and I saw that there was a for sale sign stuck in the grass. And my dad was a real estate agent, so I was used to seeing these signs a lot, but I didn't realize what it meant seeing it in my own front yard. It was around the same time that my mom's best friend, who lived across the street, when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was around that same time when we moved. And we moved from South Pasadena to the northern part of Arcadia. And we moved 2 blocks up from my new elementary school. I think I was only 5 or 6 at the time. And I remember it was really hard for me to adjust moving schools and not living next door to my best friends anymore. I didn't know it at the time, but this was the last house that I would live in. It had a really big front yard and it had a pool. It had a basketball hoop in the driveway, and it had a garage that was big enough for my dad's motorcycles. And he always told me that when I was old enough, he would teach me how to ride them. We lived just up the street from my elementary school, and my mom would walk me to school. At the time, I thought I was old enough to walk myself, but looking back now, I feel silly. It was in this house that my world started to really change. My parents got divorced, and it was in this house where I saw them start to not love each other anymore. And I saw my mom throw things, and it's the first memories that I have of her crying around that house. My parents had a very messy divorce, and it felt like that took a lot away from my life. We went from living in a house up the street from my school with a front yard and a backyard big enough for our dogs to run around in, and a pool and a basketball hoop, to a small townhouse a few miles south. This is when I started to realize and feel that my world was getting a lot smaller. All I had ever known before was the privilege of living in a house with a fence around it and flowers in the garden. But now I lived in a townhouse where we had neighbors that we could hear through the walls, and that was always really weird to me. We also had to give up our dogs, and that was really hard. They were the dogs that I had since I was little. Their names were Jack and Zoe, and it was a golden retriever and a German shepherd. The townhouse didn't allow pets, and my dad didn't want them after the divorce, so we had to give them to the pound. And that sucked. The only memories that I have of living in this townhouse are just how dark it was. The windows were north facing, and there was just never any sun that came in through. We lived there for a little bit, and I ended up becoming best friends with my neighbor, who we shared the wall with. And we would tap on the wall to say hi to each other. We didn't have phones to text each other, so that was the only way we knew that the other one was home, is when we would hear tapping on the wall. After we lived there, we couldn't afford it, so we moved back up north in this area. I remember we lived just up the street from In-N-Out, and it always smelled like burgers outside. This was when my mom couldn't afford to live in an apartment or a house that was big enough for all of us to have our own rooms. So my brothers lived in the living room, and I remember bringing my friends home one day from school and them making a comment about how weird they thought it was that my brother had to sleep on the couch every night. And I thought it was weird too. Funnily enough, after a few years, we moved to the duplex right in front. It was just two apartments that shared a wall, and we went from living in the back duplex to living in the front duplex. And there really was not much of a difference. I don't know why we moved to the front duplex. A few years later, we moved further up north to Sierra Madre. And if you've ever seen Gilmore Girls, that is exactly what Sierra Madre is like. I feel very lucky to say that I got to live in such a small town that literally had a gazebo in it. And everyone knew everyone's business. And it was fun. It felt very safe, which is something I didn't know the feeling of anymore. My first job was just down the alley from the apartment we lived in, and it was in a coffee shop that was family owned. And I worked there for 4 years, and I got to watch people's kids grow up because everyone went to that coffee shop. And there were so many elementary schools in that little town that all the kids would come in after school for ice cream. I hold Sierra Madre very close to me. It was the first time that I felt comfortable in a really long time. Then when I graduated from community college, I moved with my boyfriend all the way south, right next to Cal State Fullerton, across the street. I would walk to my undergrad classes, but I had to walk all the way through the baseball field and the football field and the tennis courts, and I hated it. The apartment was perfect for 2 college kids, but it still wasn't big enough. Then after 4 years, we moved right here to downtown Fullerton. And for the first time in a long time, I feel safe again. And I'm really happy for that.